Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, so get ready to get triggered. Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me is my expert panel, Marshall, Daniel, and Tamar. How are you guys?
Good.
Fantastic.
That's good to hear. Now, we've also got two very special guests with us in studio today. We've got Ruben Perez and Anna Rizo. I hope I said that right.
Yes,
Rizo?
you did.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for coming on the show today, guys. Why don't you tell us a little about yourselves before we get to the juicy stuff? So, Ruben, let's start with you.
All right, thanks so much for having us over. So, as you mentioned, my name is Ruben Perez. I studied at Concordia University in Political Science and Religious Studies. I now work for the Ryerson Student Union. So that's pretty much the gist of it.
Awesome. And now let's get to you, Anna. Oh, did you mention that you're Tamar's husband?
No, I didn't mention that.
I don't know why you feel that's like
Irrelevant.
yeah,
I just
personal information, Elliot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, Tamara
Anyway.
is a strong, independent woman. She doesn't like to be associated with me too much.
I would love to be associated with you. You're a great guy. I don't know.
Happy you came out
I
of
don't
the
know.
closet.
Okay. Unnecessary. So obviously this episode's off to a great start. Thank God it's recorded. And now let's move on to you, Anna.
Okay, so I graduated from law school back in Venezuela, and I did a postgrad in international business here in Toronto. So, yeah, that's pretty much. I've been living in Toronto for almost 3 years so far.
Awesome. And you like it?
Yeah, except for the winter.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, you never really get used to it.
Yeah.
You just deal with it. Yeah. It's like
So this episode in particular is pre-recorded just so our audience knows. And we're going to get straight to our main topic as it is a big one. So any developments that happen before this air date have not happened when we've recorded this episode, just so that people are aware.
we're probably going to cover it like in a
We're gonna
recap
cover-
for another episode.
Yeah, for sure. We're gonna talk about it in the future, in the episode after this one airs. Yeah. So now, as per Spirit Live rules and regulations, all opinions expressed on the show are not those of Ryerson or Ryerson faculty, and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised. So to our main story. Venezuela and the Venezuelan crisis. The South American country has been caught in a downward spiral for years when growing political discontent, further fueled by skyrocketing hyperinflation, power cuts, and shortages of food and medicine. More than 3 million Venezuelans have left the country in recent years, but what exactly is behind this crisis? What's rocking Venezuela? On today's show, we'll find out. Before we start, remember that, we'll be answering your comments. The show is live on Facebook, so we'll be answering your comments. So make sure to comment and we'll reply. First question. I'm going to throw it to our guests firstly. What ignited the current conflict in Venezuela?
So I believe that everything started back in 1999, and this was after the election of Hugo Chavez. So during the Chavez administration, there were different policies and changes that came in effect in Venezuela. Among them, mostly leading to mostly a socialized economy. Actually, Chavez called his revolution not only the Bolivarian Revolution, he also said that it was the socialism of the 21st century. So different policies from fixing control prices, from exchange controls, expropriation, nationalizations of companies, everything in the long run has led to this crisis that my country is currently experiencing. That's what I believe.
Well, would you say that that relying too much on fuel, I guess fuel energy is also a reason why the socialist policies didn't work. I mean, having socialist policy is something pretty common in the world nowadays. So would you say that it's also another element of it is also the fact that they rely too heavily on gas, I guess, or their fossil energy?
There was a lot of that. That is true. And the most important company in Venezuela is PDVSA, that is oil of Venezuela. So my country has been very focused on that economic factor. But it is not only that, because when the prices lowered down in the oil market, different countries were affected, but not as bad as Venezuela. And it's because the government has taken over different factors of the Venezuelan economy. For example, Venezuela doesn't have tourism developed. The telecommunication company was also nationalized. The electricity company was nationalized. And thousands of businesses were destroyed during the Chavez process. So if you take all that and you add the fact of what you mentioned of the oil company, obviously is a formula for disaster.
So you're basically saying that when the price of gas went down, the government had no more money to pay for anything, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. They run out. They couldn't fund the social programs that they used to do.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, I have a question for you. What would you say that the climate in Venezuela, socio-political climate in Venezuela was like before Chavez came in, like immediately leading up to Chavez?
The social climate was pretty much social democracy mostly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It was social democracy. Then we have radical left, and they say that these social democratic parties were actually right wing. None of them were actually. And then Hugo Chavez arrived to power. And something very important to mention is that he attended a military coup in the early 90s.
Okay.
So yeah, he was even in prison. And he even could win the elections after that.
Yeah, it's a very common trend to happen in Latin American countries for the military to try and take power and to stage a coup. Like it happened in Guatemala. It's happened, I think we mentioned before, Panama probably was going through something very similar. Colombia. I know Brazil, like Jair Bolsonaro, he's in favor of like coups and stuff like that. He thinks that if they're justified, they can be used. So it's very like Venezuela is like, it's like, how would I describe it? It's the biggest like Latin American like humanitarian crisis that's going on. So it's something that like we've been ignoring for way too long. It's something that like, and it's actually very sad. Like I know like personally, just because like when I used to work another job, it was like, what do you call it? Like inventory counting is a horrible job. But the lady that was there, she was from Venezuela, and she helped explain to me, like she immigrated like a couple of years ago, and it was like she just explained like there's just like everyone's poor. Like it's a horrible thing. Like unless like you were already well off and you had the opportunity to escape and to like come here, immigrate, like the best you can do is just work here and send some of the money back over there so they can like try and survive. But
that's
like,
what I do with my parents, pretty much. Exactly,
right? It's like that's the most common thing that all like Latino parents do, right? Or like when they move from another country and they still have their other family like in their home country. Like let's say they go to the United States or Canada, they'll work as much as they can and try and save as much of it and then send it off to them because they need it a lot more. So.
And what are some of the problems that somebody might face on a day-to-day basis in Venezuela? I mean, I think we generally understand that there's concerns with food shortages and poverty and shortages of all kinds of things.
It's
like
not food shortages. It's just that there's no food like whatsoever.
Well,
it's
ridiculous. That would be a shortage.
I don't know, but like a shortage would mean that at least there's some food for the people.
A shortage was in 2012. We started to experience the shortage. Right now, you go to a supermarket in Venezuela, and it's very dramatic, the change, because you can find food, but food that most of people cannot even pay. And in the past, there was no food at all. And a lot of these people are relying on a box that the government gives
like a ration
food.
card, right?
Yes, not even rational card. They have like this thing that is called the clap box, and it arrives like only once in a month. child to a Venezuelan family, and is controlled by the community council in the neighborhood. So if the community council knows that you oppose the Chavista government, they don't sell you this slab box of food.
Wow.
Even though it's rightfully yours.
Oh, so it's not even for free, right? They sell you the box.
Yeah, they sell you
for discounted price in a way.
Yes, and sometimes it comes with products that are not even appropriate for human consumption.
Like everything's, it's like some stuff is like expired or
Yes,
something like
there was even this case when they tried to sell like dog food as human food.
Wow.
that. Wow. I know for a fact, like I was watching a couple of videos, maybe like this is like one of the few times Vox has done some genuine reporting, but it was like when they talk about Venezuela.
We'll talk about that later.
I just like making a couple of jokes, but I think Vox actually does like a decent job most of the time. But specifically with the Venezuela stuff, like they were saying like the amount like. I think because like there's so many people don't have access to food, some people are relying on like literal like scraps and stuff like that, like of old carcasses and stuff like that. That's like some people might have to rely to go to such lengths just to have some food, and like it's just ridiculous the lengths that the Venezuelan people have to go to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's worth mentioning, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, that Venezuela used to be one of the wealthiest countries in South America,
That's
right?
true.
Oh yeah,
That's
of
true.
course.
But that was before they started nationalizing all of these companies, right?
And even before the 90s, like Venezuela started a downfall since the early 90s.
Yeah.
But what Ruben said is right, especially during the 60s, 70s. Venezuela was like the future of, I don't know, a developed country in Latin America. So, we received a lot of immigration instead of sending immigration. And it was really nice. Of course, I could never leave it, but I used to read it a lot.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of folks with German ancestry in Venezuela, right, who came over for work opportunities.
Oh, yeah. Actually, in Venezuela, we have a small German town. It's called Colonia Tovar, and it's very much a German-based town, and most of their descendants are German, dedicated to the fields.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so, what has the world's, response been, right? Because this isn't the first humanitarian crisis we've experienced, and as Daniel mentioned earlier, it hasn't been getting, enough necessarily media attention.
Maybe like only the last like year and a half, 2 years, right?
So what has the world's response been in terms of each country's, say, reaction, like the U.S.'s response, Canada's response, European response?
It has been delayed,
Yeah.
a delayed answer. That's what I believe. Because back when Chavez was implementing all this, he started to behave in a totalitarian way. Since 2006, I would say, he started to shut down national TV channels. He started to attack the freedom of press. He started to take several decisions, such as firing people that used to work for state-owned companies only because they didn't vote for the Socialist Party.
Wow.
So it was already showing really bad signs of what was going to happen in Venezuela. And still a lot of the international community used to praise this guy because, certain policies helping the poor people. But right now we see the result in the long term, and these poor people are having no other option than to leave through the Colombian border, through the Brazilian borders, all are risking their lives in the Caribbean Sea to reach to Trinidad and Tobago. Their destiny.
They'd rather go anywhere. Like, as soon as it's like who?
Yes, and being a refugee in Latin America is not easy because our countries are not proper developed to face this kind of situation. So a lot of these young Venezuelans, for example, the case of Venezuelan women, a lot of them end up in forced prostitution.
Yeah.
In places like Colombia, like in the border, or even in Trinidad and Tobago, or even children in these vulnerable conditions. So it's actually really bad.
Yeah, like for me, I'd want to make the comparison to like, maybe it's not like that accurate, but maybe with like Germany, like in the before World War II and stuff like that, because
With the hyperinflation.
exactly with the hyperinflation, with Hitler, removing the removal of freedom of the press and stuff like that. Like there's lots of similarities that are happening
for
with
sure.
that. So it's like that's to think that that's something that happened that long time ago is happening like right now, and it's like,
Well, history repeats
oh,
itself.
of course,
Of
I know,
course.
I get that, but it's just like,
You wouldn't expect this.
no, you
No,
wouldn't
yeah.
expect that. That's the thing, yeah.
But I mean, up to his death, Chavez did have a lot of support in the international community. I mean, just like when he died, like a lot of world leaders just went to Venezuela to pay respect in a way.
Yeah, they did.
That's just
and
them playing diplomacy, though. That's just.
And
It's
I
not
mean-
plain diplomacy in a way, right? So when you have, I guess, a country leader that's oppressing his people when he dies, usually it's cause for celebration. In a way, you don't have a lot of world leaders coming to pay respect.
oh no, but he was already oppressing people even
Right.
back then.
And I mean, I think a big part of it was so many world leaders across the world saw Chavez as a ideological ally. Now, it's escaping me right now, but who are the main people who, in the Chavez days, who are the main countries rather allied themselves with Venezuela? Was it Russia and China?
Iran.
Iran, yes, Iran. is what I'm thinking of.
Cuba as
also
well.
Cuba. Cuba
Yes.
was pretty much the leader of
Yes,
all this
course.
movement. What Fidel Castro did with Hugo Chavez was to give them the flag of the leftist leadership of Latin America. And that's why Chavez got so many advisors coming from Cuba to Venezuela. And starting from that, I don't know if you guys are kind of familiar with the South American political movements, but in Ecuador, in Argentina, in Brazil, you had Lula da Silva for more than 16 years because, well, Dilma was pretty much his same party allied. You had in so many countries in Latin America switching to the left, and a lot of it was funded by Venezuelan oil dollars,
Interesting.
petrodollars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see these political movements throughout South America and Latin America that really seem to switch from the extreme left to the extreme right. And, you've got going back as far as the 70s with Pinochet coming over, taking over for, what's his name? I can't remember his name now. But
Allende?
Allende, yeah. And we see that repeating itself throughout Latin America.
Oh,
With,
yeah.
of course, Bolsonaro taking over for Lula. And now I wonder what's next for Venezuela.
Well, I mean, there's need to mention that when Chavez came to power, there was a need for social changes in Venezuela. That's why he was so popular, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he got elected in 1996, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
and-
1998. sorry.
1998, sorry for that. So he got elected in the late 90s, but the crisis, or like his behavior as a dictatorial leader, only started much later.
In the case of Venezuela in 1998, it can be compared to current Mexico and the administration of Andrés López Obrador. Mexicans, they didn't have certainly a capitalist government. They had also something certain like a social democracy. And they were disappointed with all the corruption, all the problems that Mexico is facing. And then there is this guy with more socialist ideas as well, more left-leaning ideas, that is promising a revolution, a different, a different government for Mexico, and Mexicans go and vote for him. Something very similar happened with Hugo Chavez back in the 90s. Yeah.
And so, you mentioned about left-wing, right-wing. I want to ask, is this, Bolsonaro and how, the progression of his authoritarian, regime now, is this an issue
Bolsonaro
of
or Chavez, you mean?
Maduro.
Maduro?
Maduro,
Yeah.
the one who
Okay.
Yeah,
caused-
Maduro.
You said Bolsonaro.
Sorry.
that's why.
Is
wanna make
this?
sure you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Is this an issue of political ideology or just nonpartisan, corruption?
I think one thing has led to the other, because if you give more power to the government, it's very likely that they will become more corrupt, more addicted to power. And that's basically
Especially
what
in an undeveloped country. It's like in Latin America. And South
yeah,
America.
you don't have the strong institutions over there. So in Venezuela, we have 5 governments, not 3. We have 5 governments, 5 powers that are independent in theory from each other. So we
How
have
does that work?
Yeah, the executive power, the judicial power, the citizens' power, electoral power, and the legislative. And all of them, with the exception of the National Assembly,
Yeah.
were taken by Maduro. Well, not even Maduro. Back in the days of Hugo Chavez. So there is no
So he
independence.
took control of 4 of the 5 institutions.
Well, in theory, that's a really good idea to have 5 separate institutions. I mean,
Yeah, but if they are not really independent,
right?
then
No, for sure. Like,
they
I mean,
are
in theory,
corrupt.
it's a good idea, but like if you take them over, obviously.
Yeah, like it doesn't work. So, and from that, he started to, fire people from PDVSA, the oil company, because they were not loyal to Chavez. People who decided to sign a referendum against them, a lot of them were fired or removed from the charge. That thing happened to my dad, actually.
Wow.
Yes, only because he decided to vote for a referendum against Chavez. And starting from that, the government started to expand, and it attracts more people because it's like, oh, I want to get a job, but I live and work in a small town where my best option is to work with the government. What this person do? Go and apply with a job within the government. And what is the result? You need to vote for me. You need to be loyal to me. And if you are not loyal, I'm going to fire you.
Right, so it's basically buying political loyalty for job, money, housing, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in this case, these people started to get more and more powerful. They started to get access to more state resources, and they are millionaires nowadays. The richest woman in Venezuela is the daughter of Hugo Chavez.
Wow.
Oh, shit.
So yeah, I wanted to ask, like, in terms of international aid or international intervention, if there has been any, like, what would you say, like, you're expecting to see, if any?
I believe that when it comes to international intervention, I am not sure if Maduro will live peacefully, because we're talking about a government that is involved in drug trafficking. We're talking about a government that has been committing human rights violations.
Wait, what do you mean with drug trafficking, though? Like, I'm obviously not like they're actually like doing it themselves, but
Yeah, they do.
They like drugs into their own country.
Yeah, and Venezuela is the most important port.
You're saying no. You're telling me that the government there's a difference between like the government allowing like narcos to do it or just the government itself doing it. You're saying the government itself does that,
Yes.
bringing in their drugs.
Yes.
That's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
I mean, in a way, if
Sorry.
the government does it, it becomes legal.
Yeah, and
And
the
yet,
ones
and yet it's still
leading-
outlawed, right?
Yeah, the ones leading the biggest drug cartel in Venezuela is Diosdado Cabello, and well,
And for our viewers who don't know who that is,
yeah, and this guy is the right hand of Maduro. He was the president of the National Assembly in the past. And when the Chavistas were still in power of the National Assembly, and he's one of the most powerful men inside the Maduro regime, and he's also a drug lord.
Wow. That's like the comparison behind it is like, well, do you guys know like about like Colombia and stuff like that? Like that's how like Pablo Escobar's power and influence like in his time was so strong that he was able to get like a seat. Like,
Yeah, inside the Congress.
inside the House of Commons and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. So it's like,
Well, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt to a certain extent. I mean, we're viewing it from an external perspective, but in a way, if the government allows it, it becomes legal for that particular country.
yeah, but this
Legal
stuff,
for the right people.
yeah, but this
Well,
stuff
yeah,
only
yeah.
happens because these countries have poor systems in place. These aren't properly run democracies. They're riddled with nepotism, riddled with corruption. But yeah, it's like
Yeah, also communism. So
it is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, not in theory. Communism in theory is actually a pretty decent idea, and I'm sure that's a debate for another time. But
You know, people
argue with
always
that, but
say
okay.
it's good on paper, bad in execution. I think it's bad.
I have
both
the
ways.
paper right here.
I
100
think-
million deaths.
I think it's
right
bad
here.
on paper too. Bad.
well, I mean, the paper in
theory,
itself,
too.
if you refer back to Marxist writings, it actually makes sense.
Yeah.
until you put it in practice.
Well,
Didn't
I
know
mean,
about
you can't
that.
really put it in practice because it's too.
Just kidding, I did.
Basically, when
But
Marx.
should we really trust a book that was written so many years ago? So like old books like
Hey,
that?
look at the Bible.
Well,
you
yeah.
still have millions of
That's
people
exactly
trusting
what I
in
was
it, right?
referring
I knew,
to.
of course, you were referring to that,
Yeah.
heathen. And no, I don't think it being old has anything to do with how valid it is. I think that the whole fact that that Marxism, communism, is necessarily anarchistic, but for it to be implemented,
It's not anarchistic. It goes through a period of anarchy before it becomes before it becomes a regime that gives everyone an equal chance, equal opportunity.
For sure, but the idea of Marxism, Marx sees a society without class, a non-hierarchical society. In other words, an anarchistic society.
Well, not necessarily. Like a society without class is only anarchist if you view it within the perspective that there needs to be classes. If you get what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying. No, I get what you're saying. And I suppose that's a totally valid perspective as well. And I don't want to distract from the topic too much, but I think my main problem with Marxism in theory is the fact that its implementation requires force, and Lenin does address this appropriately in his belief that the force will kind of dissipate after a while. But the implementation of it requires force and authority, but the actual execution of these principles require a lack of force and authority.
So does everyone believe or not believe that what's happening in Venezuela is a result of Marxism or communism?
I do believe so, because they are starting to apply basically different theories through it. They started to come with these socialist ideas, creating cooperatives, believing in a community council, everything that was controlled within the community, but directed through a government. So in the end of the day, you don't let what guarantees you that this will actually work and that the government won't become totalitarian? There's no guarantee.
Right, but you have to make a difference between communism and socialism in a way, right? Especially communism, the way we usually understand it as like USSR, thousands of millions of deaths. Like, it's totally different. In practice, it's a great idea to give people the power to decide, right?
Right.
But there is no guarantee that the government won't become totalitarian at a certain point. But like in theory, it's a great idea to give people the power to decide on their own destiny.
Yeah, they do.
It's a tool to make actually. In theory, it's a tool to make sure that the government doesn't become totalitarian.
I don't believe so, because in the end, the government still keep the guns. And if you keep the guns, you pretty much can turn totalitarian.
Might is always right, regardless of truth. Truth is thrown out the window when might is involved. And I think when you have a system in which might is so heavily concentrated and not concentrated on the people. It's concentrated on the people who have the power to oppress.
Like military
oppression. Oppression
yeah.
is necessitated by that, and I don't entirely think that this situation is exclusively due to Marxism or communism or socialism, what have you. But I do certainly think that it's a big part of it.
Yeah, and I guess like kind of bringing it back to what I asked. I'm personally interested in hearing like how the international community is reacting to this crisis. And I know like there's different opinions that people have whether or not, America should ever get involved or Canada should get involved. So for our guests, I'm wondering like what like your opinion is on that in this specific instance.
I believe that if Maduro doesn't allow democratic elections, but like really democratic elections, not like the ones they had last year that is more similar to what happens in Cuba or North Korea.
That's why there were so many protests though, and that's why it got and that's why it got all this exposure, and that's why we're talking about it now, because they had elections that everyone knew were completely undemocratic.
Even Smartmatic, that is the company that used to count the votes, the CEO said that during the elections of the National Constituent the Constituent National Assembly, there were so many irregularities that in the end the numbers don't make sense, and Smartmatic stopped operating in my country because they say that my government committed fraud. And so you have an illegitimate president that is just starving its own people, that has caused the largest humanitarian crisis that is affecting South America. There needs to be an international coalition if he doesn't leave peacefully.
And how do you see that international coalition? What kind of actions do you see the international community taking to have that rectified and to fix Venezuela?
Right now, you have different options going on. The biggest support is coming from the United States, but you also have the Lima Group, which Peru and Canada are leading. So for the Lima Group, They don't believe in a military intervention.
And who is the Lima group, just for our audience?
The Lima group is a group that was created to deal with the Venezuelan humanitarian and refugee crisis. And this is involved with governments such as Canada, Peru, Chile. Different countries in Latin America are involved in this group, and they propose this idea. But with the United States, any option is over the table. It's on top of the table. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. Obviously, like at a certain point, there is such a concept as sovereignty. Like last time I checked, Venezuela is a sovereign country, so there is no right for other countries to tell them how to run their own business. Obviously, if we get to the point where the crisis gets out of hand,
The crisis is already out of hand.
right? But it doesn't in any way justify military intervention, right?
Yes,
the
it
thing
does.
is that you're
No, it
having foreign
I personally do think it
Well,
does.
so then you give a precedent, right? Every time there's a crisis
but-
that can be resolved peacefully, you just send the army.
Yeah, but the United States already made that precedent by not invading, but like intervening in all of these Latin American countries.
Yeah, but look at the results of it, right?
not all of them are bad.
Yeah,
The United
well,
States
it's
did
going
that in Chile, and look at Chile
Yeah,
nowadays.
and a lot of times they just installed a puppet government, and what happened afterwards is that it actually created more problem for the people themselves.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you on that aspect. Like American intervention has not worked for most of the time, but I do think some sort of intervention has to happen. I don't think U.S. needs to be in charge of it because like Tamara said it before. Like history keeps repeating itself. We know that whenever a U.S. Backed intervention happens, it usually like results in something shittier.
Right.
Right.
So-
For me, I think it would need to be like, maybe like on a diplomatic way somehow to try and resolve this humanitarian crisis, whether it be persecuting Maduro through the ICC or the ICJ. I know personally, like I don't like those institutions because I just don't think they're maybe that effective. But like I'm willing to throw out some options and figure out some solutions. And if people can think that could be a genuine solution for that, at least a way to like prosecute him, maybe that could help.
Do you feel that diplomatic and non-military intervention has happened thus far at all?
Yes, they have taken the dialogue to different levels, from the Organization of American States to the United Nations. And as I said, if you're having people that are involved in drug cartels, even in terrorism in the Middle East, they are not going to leave because they know that if they leave, they will probably end up in prison. And that's the last thing that they want.
They're going to hold on to power for as long as they can.
Exactly.
And then like when we know that that's going to happen, unfortunately, we need to like stoop to their level, and we need to like fight fire with fire. You know?
Yeah.
Like that's like if only in those situations when we know they're not going to leave their post, that's when like the only other option is some sort of military intervention.
Yeah, 'cause
and I
power's
hate
gotten
saying
to
that,
theirs.
huh?
Power has gotten so much to their heads.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what's,
Think of, like that's what happened with Libya, right? With Gaddafi. Like, I can think of some other examples,
and
right?
The sad situation is that you're playing with people's lives in this, because
Yeah.
while you call for another dialogue, like what Mexico and Uruguay proposed, there's people dying because they don't have medicine.
Like how many
Same
Venezuelans are going to have to die before we actually have to figure out what's going to happen?
Yeah, but same thing with the military intervention. There's always people dying, right? Like whether it's people that are part of the army, which it's their job to die to a certain extent,
Right.
but there's also there's also civilian casualties all the time. Whenever there is a military intervention, there's civilian casualties.
Right.
So there's people going to die anyway, right? So might as well try to do it in the most peaceful manner.
What's the cartel situation like in Venezuela?
The cartel situation is actually one big cartel that is the Cartel of El Soles, like I mentioned it.
That's the name of the cartel?
Yes. Playing with the distribution and having, of course, another group, like not paramilitary, but like criminal organizations within the country.
Guerrilla terrorist
But there is
organizations,
a paramilitary presence to some extent.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Of course. Especially FARC.
Yes.
From Colombia
FARC,
is operating
okay. I do
mostly
know
in
about FARC.
Venezuela.
Really? Even though like they have political status in Colombia now?
No,
They just switched the thing?
Yes.
Damn.
So I guess my concern would be is the creation of a power vacuum and a military intervention giving the opportunity for FARC and other paramilitary organizations as well as cartels to seize power. And I feel like
that's a real problem,
does it get much worse than Maduro? No. I mean, but we don't know. We once said that it can't get much worse than Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
And of course it did. And so although I am more on the side of military intervention in this situation, at least as far as seeing things go well for the Venezuelan people, I do worry about the potential for a power vacuum and for paramilitary and cartels seizing power.
See, like the problem is, like, even if intervention does occur, there's one of two things that can happen. They create a proper democracy, create a new constitution, and they completely reform the country. But in that same time, like, the narcos are just gonna step into, and they're gonna not necessarily seize power, but they're gonna instill fear into the Venezuelan public. So that they're gonna vote for certain policies and stuff like that, because that's how much power and influence those cartels are going to have if something happens.
But the good thing about this one is that if there is indeed a change of the government, they can go after Cabello, that is the main leader, and the guy funded them. So that would play a different role. Now, the criminality in Venezuela involving all the drug situation is something that even Venezuelans cannot answer how it should be fixed, because it's so large at this extent that it's a really bad issue.
What about drugs? About, you mean the Venezuelan people consuming them, or just like in general?
No, just the crime.
Yeah,
the
crime
that
rate
associated
is
with
crazy,
it.
yeah.
So you would say that the issue of dealing with Maduro is a much more pressing issue than the cartels or the paramilitary organizations?
Because they're interconnected. If you attack Maduro...
So they're on the same side as
Yes.
Maduro. Okay, okay. So that actually changes things a bit, because when you see these situations in other countries where there's been a power vacuum, it's been opposing forces who took power following the deposition of a despot.
Well, I mean, in a way, that's a bit of a generalization, because even within political powers, there's different factions, right?
Sure.
So if Maduro leaves, it doesn't, like, officially he's not associated with those cartels. Right?
Yes, of course.
He is unofficially, like, everyone knows about it. It's not a secret, really.
Yeah.
But, like, in the eyes of the world, it's still two different institutions. So it still creates that power vacuum once Maduro is out of power.
That is true.
Yeah, you're making some good points here, man.
Well, thank you very much. But I'm saying, like, at the end of the day, I don't think military intervention is ever justified. I mean, we have I'm not making any comparison, because any humanitarian crisis is really bad, but we have way worse humanitarian crisis in the world. And you have to ask yourself, why does the U.S. want to intervene in that particular country and not in other countries?
I'm inclined to agree with you, Ruben, because I generally am very supportive of the concept of sovereignty, as well as the notion that, you know, a country that is performing military intervention is doing so for their benefit and not for the benefit of the country being intervened.
Yes.
That's the problem.
But
That's the problem with
that
that
is
stuff.
the other thing, that Venezuela is not really independent from foreign powers. As a matter of fact, Maduro has been receiving a lot of support from China, Russia, and Cuba, and we even have Cuban military members involved in our army. So how we are sovereign when we are having actually a lot of countries inflicting on us?
And that's a great point.
Not necessarily. I mean, like, you still keep your sovereignty if you allow those external elements to come in.
It's being allowed by the government, not by the Venezuelan people.
Yeah, but the idea of sovereignty only makes sense if the government is actually serving the needs of the people, though, right?
Venezuelans are being kidnapped by a criminal government.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that if the people are being served, the interests of the people are being served by an intervention, I don't see that as a violation of sovereignty.
Right, but once again, when did it ever happen that there was a military intervention and the people were served? You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, let's say the U.S. does a military intervention, they will impose their views, their regime, their people onto the Venezuelan people. They will create that power vacuum, and at the end of the day, the Venezuelan people will not have their word to say, right?
See, and
it's a vicious circle in a way.
And that's why it didn't work all those times when the U.S. intervened, because it was the U.S. specifically. I think what we were proposing before was like a coalition or something like that.
Well, not necessarily. Like, look at Libya, for example. You had France, you had a lot of European countries, you had the United States, you had Canada, but look at the results, right? Libya is still a mess today.
Yeah,
in which country?
but
Libya.
not necessarily.
Libya.
Look at Panama. You can take Panama as an example.
Or Argentina or Chile.
Or Chile. Chile is having right now the best quality of life in Latin America.
Right, but what did it take for them to get there, right?
Yeah, but it's
takes
better
for
than
the
just
US
keeping them like Cuba.
Right, but it's the U.S. imposing a puppet government, the people suffering, and then the people having to rise up once again to regain their
They
freedom.
actually threw out Pinochet through vote.
He himself had a referendum saying, "Do you still want me or no?"
Yeah, that's not happening with my president.
Right.
Yeah, it's
but-
not like you'd ever do that. Like,
No.
No.
And I think when you have
True that, but
the-
it's giving people a voice. That's what it is at the end of the day.
For me personally, this isn't about like Venezuela being specifically socialist or communist or anything like that. Like even if Maduro was in charge and he was in charge of the capital of Venezuela and was systematically oppressing people in the same way, then I would still justify going through an intervention and stuff like that. Because I know some of the questions before we were talking about whether it's politically motivated just because it's a socialist government. So it's like, it's not about like, for me. I could give less hoots about that, but it's just about protecting these Venezuelan people. No one is there to protect them. Someone needs to do that job.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask, what needs to happen, like moving forward.
What do you think? I think needs to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what Anna was saying, like some sort of coalition or something like to go in, but it's.
I believe is in the end of the day there will be a coalition because, like I said, this is not only affecting Venezuela. This started to affect the neighbor countries. This is affecting South America,
and it affects our global economy too, though, because Venezuela could have, like, if Venezuela was actually propped up to have a very strong economy, even though it's based like in a fossil fuel economy. That could have easily helped us a lot more. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to take like maybe not specifically for Canada, but Venezuela could have like improved the economy of all the other Latin American countries if they were able to export their oil and like all of their natural resources to the other countries and stuff like that. That would have lifted everyone out of poverty if they were able to do it properly without that was not using nationally operated a government-operated corporation. So
now with the interim president, right?
Yeah.
What was his full name again?
Juan Guaido.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can't pronounce it for the life of me. But,
almost like Guido, but
but with him in power, is that gonna help or hinder the situation?
Oh yes, it's absolutely helping, but it's because this guy didn't self-proclaim himself like some people
The
say.
Constitution allowed him to become in power,
yes, different articles, 2033, 335, 138, if I'm not wrong. They are the different articles taken by the Venezuelan Constitution. That is pretty much the mechanism of protection that the Venezuelan Constitution has to defend the democracy of the country.
So then
Didn't Chavez create a new constitution in a way when he got to power?
Yes,
and that's why it
and-
makes it easier for him to oppress the people. Because
Yeah,
he
no,
made-
but even this constitution, this was approved by Hugo Chavez, the one that he mentioned. And can you imagine that not even the lawmakers imagine such a bad situation in the country that they couldn't create a particular article that will help to find the solution of this situation, at least the constitutional solution. They need to interpret the norm and apply the mechanism of the protections principle in order to reach to this conclusion that Maduro is illegitimate.
So then, if there's a lot of collusion in the government, how did lawmakers and how did the people manage to appoint the interim president?
They did it because Maduro, first of all, everything started back in 2015 when Venezuela elected the National Assembly. Starting from that, it was the only power out of the hands of the Chavismo. So this means trouble for them. They used the judicial power in order to take over the National Assembly, and by a decree in 2017, Maduro stripped this National Assembly elected by the Venezuelan people from its powers, and he called for a new National Assembly to be elected under any fraudulent conditions that you can imagine. That's what I said. Mentioned that's what I mentioned before, that the CEO of Smartmatic stopped operating because there was fraud. And if you look at the Constituent National Assembly in Venezuela right now in Google, you will realize that all of them belong to the Venezuelan Maduro regime. So starting from that, Maduro also called for another elections, presidential elections, and different parties that belonged to the positions were banned. So there wasn't free elections.
So only his party or other parties similar that would support him would be able to run?
Yes, exactly.
So if you have like a bullshit, like a liberal party that is still like Chavista in concept, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And he managed this, and most of Venezuelans were not even willing to vote because they don't trust in the institutions anymore because they know they're corrupted. So after that, Maduro, he was announced that he was, declared the president, and he was supposed to sorry, my English is betraying me right now. Take position on the 10th of January, but he knew he should do this in front of the National Assembly. How can he do that when he pretty much dismantled the National Assembly elected by the Venezuelan people? And that's a sine qua non condition in order to claim yourself as the legitimate president. If he doesn't do it, he is not the president. And that's when Juan Guaido entered in place, because he said, you didn't swear yourself to me, you didn't took position of the charge.
You didn't officially ratify
it. In front of my assembly, so you are not the president of Venezuela because you didn't follow the steps. And so there is a void. There is no president. And according to the Venezuelan constitution, if the president is not in charge and he's absent, the one who should call for elections is the president of the National Assembly. So he's an interim president because of that.
And so voting in Venezuela, there's no privacy for the voting. They know who you voted for?
There was supposed to be privacy in the past, but still they played along with the numbers, and they used also a lot of fear. So, for example, I have my family, they live in a small town. They are the typical case of small town people who needs to work for the government because it's the only thing that they can work for, and they are usually under threat of losing their jobs if they don't support Maduro or vote for him.
And how do they know who they voted for? They're able to see who you voted for?
They are not even able, but people are so scared of this situation that even if they are not able to see it, they still vote for him because, of course, is your work, is the money that you get, is everything at risk. And if you have a family, you have even more things at risk.
I see. Yeah, you just don't want to take any risks. Like you don't even know if Maduro is going to be able to see who you voted for. I see. Okay.
Well, I mean, there's always like a social element in this kind of situations where, obviously, like as people that live in a social cocoon, you need to talk to people about whether it's your political beliefs, or whether it's something else. And I'm sure there's always someone that will report back to the government. So it's that state of constant fear.
It's the constant fear. Like you cannot talk bad by the government. For example, I used to work in the telecommunication company that was nationalized by Maduro, and I remember that even posting something in social media against Maduro could put my job under threat.
But you always talk about how the job security is at risk if you criticize Maduro, but in terms of is that the only danger it is, or is it a potential a life-threatening danger as well?
Yeah. Especially right now.
Even if you were protesting or being a political activist, there's a difference between posting something on social media and I guess protesting actually there in front of the institution.
You're right. You're totally right about it. And right now there is Maduro created this. There are a police force that is called FAES, and FAES is entering the house of people in poor neighborhoods in Venezuela, chasing down people who are protesting in these neighborhoods and killing them.
Wow.
Just killing them.
Wow.
It's like the SS. That's ridiculous, man. That's crazy.
I mean, I gotta say, as bad as the situation is, it's this situation seems to be more. What's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily correct, but it's not as bad as other regimes throughout the world, where if you express
dissent towards something,
dissent towards the government, you get killed or you get put in jail right away. Like, I mean, as a matter of fact, the interim president is still alive. Maybe he's hiding somewhere, but he's still alive.
He's
not in
usually
prison.
hiding himself.
Yeah. What if he came out of hiding? Would he be killed?
The only thing that is keeping Juan Guaido alive is the threat of the United States. That's the reality.
And so the military, they totally side with Maduro.
Yeah,
I see.
they still do.
Okay.
Wow.
Why is that?
why is that?
Why? Because the military is keeping a lot of privilege that average Venezuelans don't have.
Yeah, like they have like a better access to food, better homes and stuff like that.
Electronics, cars,
yeah.
expensive cars they can get
iPhones,
access to. Yeah.
AirPods, you know.
AirPods.
Yeah, for real. For real.
It's crazy how many elements there are to this, because I think when you look in these situations,
I love this topic. It's
you
so
often
good.
assume that, you know, you have these questions, why would anybody side with Maduro? Why would anybody side with whoever the despot of the day is? And I guess people don't realize how deep these connections, how deep the corruption goes with giving fancy cars to the military and that kind of thing. And I think when you're in that kind of situation, it's so hard not to side with the government, no matter how evil the government might be.
Just out of fear and
just out of fear
bribery.
and bribery.
Yeah,
I
pretty
feel
much.
like listening to these kind of stories and hearing what is going on with the military and what's going on in Venezuela makes me personally realize like how lucky we are to live in Canada. Like I know we're talking a lot about the fight on free speech and all of that, but then you compare it to what's going on in Venezuela, and it's like there is nothing. Like it's not even comparable at this point.
Believe me, I was happy when I went to a Costco for the first time in Canada. Yeah.
Damn.
Wow. Wait, what's the difference when you say that, when you're talking about Costco in Canada?
Oh, because in Venezuela, I couldn't buy food like I do here.
Really?
Yes, in Venezuela, even for buying a box of cornflakes, I used to put my fingerprint in the cash machine, because that was the way that they knew that I was buying this box of cornflakes, and I couldn't buy this box of cornflakes again until the next week.
Wow.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah, imagine that if like Costco's like, yeah, you can come in just once a week.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, just buy milk, but once a week.
yeah, it's like,
But it's so weird because like if you're paying for it, why don't they want your money?
No, because that's the way the government decided to deal with the scarcity and shortages.
Okay.
Wow. So then to wrap up, since we have just about 5 minutes left, more so because we talked a little about like what is the future, what do you want to see happen? And this is open to everybody. I'll start with Anna's response, but anybody is welcome to say their views on what they want to happen.
let's go with the
And
guest
how.
first.
Yeah. So
and then-
Anna.
What do I want to happen? I want my country to have really free elections. I want Venezuelan people to decide, and I want my country to be free again. That's what I want.
And how do you want that to happen?
I want that to happen.
With a military intervention?
If there's a military intervention, let it be. But to continue the way it is just a nightmare, a never-ending nightmare.
Yeah. Ruben?
Well, I mean, obviously, like, I can't really relate to the situation, and I'm not in a position to say what I want to see for a country that's not necessarily mine. I mean, obviously, like, I think we could all agree that we want the country to be a democracy. I mean, to a certain extent, to see the people having a voice and having their voices heard. I think that's what we're hoping for at this point. How it happened, I think it's up to the people to decide. It's not up to foreign powers to impose their ideology on others.
That's
you're right
fair.
about that.
Marshall?
Yeah, I kind of have a middle point between those two. Like, I And I guess not that Anna was pro military intervention necessarily, but she makes a great point. If that's how it has to be, that's how it has to be for me. You know, I want the same things that anybody else wants for any country. I just want them to be doing well, their people to be doing okay. And as much as I don't like to see foreign countries acting within other countries, I do think that whatever serves the interests of the Venezuelan people the most, if that has to be a military intervention, then so be it.
And do you think that's what they want?
Simply from what I read online, it seems like there is quite a bit of support for some sort of intervention from the U.S. in particular. But I also don't think I'm in a position to say what they want. I don't even think it's necessarily about what they want, because nobody wants another country's military in their country.
Yeah, that's true. No one wants that.
It's that, you know,
It's just the
what
only
you might
option
need.
left.
Yeah, exactly.
Daniel?
Yeah, I'd probably just want some sort of military intervention, but like for me, I want history at least to be changed, and like every time a Latin American country has gone through something like this, it's always been the U.S. that's been in charge. If this were to happen, I wouldn't want the U.S. to be in charge.
Who would you want?
Canada. Why not?
Do you
Colombia.
Polite Canadians.
think? Do you think we really could do anything?
It's like
Does Canada
it's a
even have an
coalition though.
army?
No,
Yeah.
but it's a but like a coalition. Like the thing is, I think I don't know if maybe I said it in my women war and politics class, but like this, the U.S. has always been doing this for their needs, just to serve their personal interest. I just wish one time the U.S. would do this, not to not serve their own personal needs and stuff like that. Because if they do that, it's just gonna be just like Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. It's just gonna be the Saudi Arabia of South America. It's just gonna be a very large fossil fuel economy country that's consistently oppressing its own people but they're allowed to do it just because they have American support. That's fucked up.
And sadly, I don't think that'll ever happen, that a country ever does something. I mean, the U.S. specifically does something to that
that's
not
a sad
just
reality.
benefits them.
Yeah,
That's a sad reality.
altruistically.
And tomorrow,
Maybe I'm too optimistic, but
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm still learning a lot
Yeah.
more about the situation. I'll admit I'm not, the most well briefed on it. But that being said, like, I'm definitely not in any position to speak for Venezuelan people or, people that are going through this crisis. Like I said, here in Canada, I feel very privileged, especially after hearing everything that Anna had to say. So I guess really, listening to the Venezuelan people and giving them a voice and hearing what they want to say, and hearing what they want done is like the number one important thing here to solve this crisis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, just like Tamara, I'm not the most educated on the crisis, but definitely whatever the Venezuelan people want, I think should be done, just because they're the ones who have been suffering, and they should be the ones to
And they have
choose
to
what
live
happens.
with the results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that was our show for this week. Thank you to everyone that's hopefully tuning in, and thank you, a big thank you to Ruben and Anna for coming on. You both really made the show amazing with
Thank
your
you.
knowledge. And again, thank you to the usual suspects, Tamar, Daniel, Marshall. That was our show for this week. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of the Raben Report. Same day, same time, same people. Have a great day, everyone.